Spirit of life, be with us in this time of prayer. Help us to feel the rhythm of our own breathing, to quiet the chatter in our heads, to feel at home in our bodies. Help us to feel grounded and centered, to embrace the stillness. Comfort us in our sadness. Accompany us in our joy. Hold us in our unknowing. Spirit of life, be with us when we leave this sanctuary. Help us to carry with us the strength of connectedness. Our reading this morning is by Reverend Robert Walsh. I had a car accident on a sunny Saturday on the crowded expressway heading into the city. I was driving in the fast lane when something went wrong up ahead. My little car got sandwiched between a delivery van ahead of me and a big new pickup truck behind. I was fourth in a 6-vehicle pileup. When everything came to rest, I sat alone in a daze. I became aware of a pain in my chest. I imagined internal injuries or a heart attack. Tears came to my eyes. I was afraid. Help came. First the police, then ambulance technicians who took me to an emergency room, then nurses and doctors. Word came that friends were on the way. Waves of relief washed over me as I surrendered myself into the care of competent helpers. Propped up in the emergency room bed, I was momentarily alone in my cubicle. The tears came again, this time tears of gratitude. I was still afraid. The pain in my chest was still there, and I did not know what my injuries were or what losses I might suffer. But now everything was different, for I was no longer alone. Here's the best part, Robbie writes. I was not alone, even when I thought I was, out there in my crumpled car. What ultimately keeps us company is a spirit that is present in caring people, a spirit of healing and wholeness and love. It's the spirit of creation, and it has many names. Caring people are the most wonderful and precious agents of that spirit. But I have come to believe that it is present even when caring people are not nearby. Even in solitude, we are in good company. We are connected to the interdependent web of all being and to the source of being beyond it. This connection is never far away. It is always accessible. The problem is, we forget. That is why I was so afraid. I had forgotten. The caring people reminded me. In times to come, may we remember and be grateful. When chaos breaks through the orderly background and sends life off in an unexpected and unwanted direction, may we remember and be grateful that we are not alone. And may each caring one of us be a reminder to others of our common gift of the good company of the Spirit. So a few weeks ago, we engaged some surveyors to come and take measurements around the meeting house that would eventually tell us what elevation we are at compared to sea level. I wasn't sure we wanted to know. This is all related to our winter flood, of course. Just how at risk are we for future flooding? And how do we measure up compared to the sea? Well, it turns out that our first floor is at about 7 feet. But to take an elevation measurement, the surveyors must first have a benchmark. All over the United States, you will find, if you look carefully, little round brass plates inscribed with U.S. Geological Survey benchmark, each designating the elevation above sea level, as well as the date that the benchmark was placed there. On the flattest plain in the Midwest or at the highest mountain in the Rockies, those round plates are anchored into the ground, marking that location's elevation above sea level. And they serve as a reference for all geological surveys and maps. So it turns out that the fixed point in Provincetown is the post office. The good old post office, so constant. If anyone else in town wants to know what elevation they are at, then the surveyors start at the post office and go from there. I invite you to look for the little round plaque the next time you are there. A hint, start on the steps. In his book, Shorelines, Life Lessons from the Sea, Reverend Edwin Lynn writes, I think we all have our own benchmarks, fixed points of reference fastened to a place or event that by their permanence or repetition provide a solid foundation from which our lives are measured. Ed was one of my teachers in seminary. I'm fascinated by this idea of geological benchmarks, and I love how Ed applies it to our lives. I want to invite you to think for a moment or two about your own fixed points of reference. You can close your eyes if you want to. I invite you to bring to mind something or someone or some place that has been steadfast in your life. Something or someone or some place that you have returned to over and over again and depended on for always being there for you. And since we've been going really deep with theology lately, I want to extend Ed's metaphor to theological benchmarks. We have fixed points of reference fastened not only to a person or place or event that provide permanence and repetition for us, but think now, what are some of our benchmarks that are fastened to a belief that we turn to in hard times? Fastened to a connection beyond ourselves that can serve over and over again to take us outside of ourselves. Can you bring to mind anything that you believe strongly about the world that you sometimes need to remind yourself of? And you can open your eyes. My junior year of college, before I entered seminary, I studied abroad in Norwich, England. And this is the home of the famous Christian mystic, Julian of Norwich. She lived in the 1300s. And although not very much is known about her life before she walled herself into a small brick room at the side of a church, she later became famous for her writings from within that room. In Julian's time, the 100 Years' War was raging, and at the same time, the plague was ravaging Europe. Nearly half of the residents of Norwich died in a 3-year period. These were dark times. And Julian lived literally in the darkness, although her anchorage did have a small window and a slot through which she could receive food and talk to visitors. I did visit Julian of Norwich's cell when I was studying there. When Julian was about 30 years old, she nearly died of a terrible illness. And as she lay on what everyone thought was her deathbed, she began to have visions. She had 16 visions over the course of a week, and when she made a miraculous recovery from her illness, she woke absolutely convinced of God's enveloping and all-encompassing love and goodness. She spent the next 20 years reflecting on these visions and writing down what she had learned from them. In one of her most famous visions, God shows Julian something the size of a hazelnut. And in this he showed me a little thing, she wrote, the quantity of a hazelnut lying in the palm of my hand, as it seemed. And it was as round as any ball. I looked upon it with the eye of my understanding and thought, what may this be? And it was answered generally thus, it is all that is made. I marveled how it might last, for I thought it might suddenly have fallen to nothing for littleness. And I was answered in my understanding, it lasts and ever shall, for God loves it. And so have all things their beginning by the love of God. In another vision, the figure of Jesus tells her, all will be well, and all will be well, and every manner of thing will be well. These beliefs became her benchmarks, the trusted faith of God's love, which she could return to over and over, no matter what. My touchstones in life, my benchmarks, have not so much been born out of God's love, but out of the love of my family and the web of friendships that I have built over my lifetime. It is this love that holds me even during dark times. It is these people that I can return to over and over again to be reminded of my place in the world. And it is their love that reminds me that all will be well, and all will be well, and all manner of things will be well. I do like that vision of the hazelnut, though, and the idea that we can marvel and take comfort in all that is made. Nature and the mystery of creation that encompasses natural places have also been a spiritual benchmark for me. I return again and again to the ocean, to the forest, to the garden. They are always there to make me feel both big and small, and to put my life into the perspective of an ageless time. and it usually helps. Now, this may seem like a non sequitur, but bear with me. I promise it all connects in the end. I want to tell you another story about our former foster children and their bedtime routine. I mentioned last week during our service on prayer that the 3- and 4-year-olds that we took care of last fall had a lot of trouble sleeping. And even though it's true that the prayer we recited with them each night helped to create routine and make them feel safe, it didn't entirely help with the sleeping thing. Some of you were at our house one night shortly after their arrival when we were hosting a circle supper. You saw firsthand how difficult it was to get these little tykes off to bed. And Loretta wins the prize for having children's books in her car and reading to the 3-year-old for about an hour. But anyway, after weeks of very little sleep, we were desperate enough to consult parenting books and foster parenting blogs, and we were willing to try anything that anyone suggested. Most of the parenting books and blogs said the same thing. You start with the regular nightly routine, pajamas and teeth brushing and all of that. Then you do some things that bring them comfort. Prayer, or giving them their favorite stuffed animal, or making sure they have their special blanket. Then you read to them for a set amount of time. Some books even said to use a timer. Then you put on a nightlight and turn off all the other lights. And no matter how much they beg you, you don't read them another story. But you can sit at the end of their bed for a few minutes. But you don't talk to them or sing to them, you just sit there. And then you get up quietly, but if they are still not sleeping, you don't really leave. You sit in the doorway where they can see you. Then, after a while, if they are still not asleep, you move to the hallway where they can't see you. And if they call out to you, you can tell them that you are there, but you don't go back into the room. You just sit in the hallway. So that is what we started doing. And it kind of worked. I mean, they would still wake up in the middle of the night, but at least it got them off to sleep in a more timely fashion. But the thing that you need to know about these kids is that they were the most polite kids in the world. Like I said, they were 3 and 4, and they were just adorable. And they said please and thank you and excuse me. And the little girl was bold and brave, and the little boy, even though he was older, was scared a lot. And he was scared of being alone in the dark at night. And like I said, he was so polite, and so when he was scared, instead of crying, he would call out, excuse me, I'm scared." And how can you not respond to that, right? Now, when we stumbled upon this hallway thing, he was a little less scared, but he would still call out sometimes after the doorway transition. Just when I thought for sure he was asleep, he would call out, and he would say, excuse me, are you still there?" And I would say, "Yes, I'm still here." And that was really all that he needed to hear. And I would stay in the hallway until, assured that he was not alone, he would eventually drift off to sleep. Author and teacher Chet Ramo tells a moving story about the summer night he stayed alone in the Galeras Oratory, a tiny 7th century stone building that is the oldest in Ireland that remains intact. He describes the structure as about the size of a 1-car garage with a small entrance at the front and a tiny window at the back open to the elements. The description reminds me a little bit of Julian of Norwich's place. oratory is dark, even in the middle of the day, and intensely so at night. Chet wasn't exactly sure why staying overnight was important to him. He writes, "I had been thinking about skepticism and prayer, and I wanted to experience something of whatever it was that inspired Irish monks to seek out these rough hermitages perched on the edge of Europe, or as they imagined, the edge of eternity." Reverend Ed Lynn tells Chet's story. After enjoying the brilliant starry night, he retired to the interior of the oratory, snuggled himself into a back corner with his knees tucked under his chin, and became immersed in the deep, isolating silence. He shivered in the night air, waiting. As the hours passed, he began to feel a presence, a powerful sensation of something or someone sharing that empty darkness. He continued by explaining that he is not a mystical person, but he knew he was not alone in that oratory. The same feeling that the monks in times past may have felt. The feeling was so strong that he went outside and was rewarded by the sight of the aurora borealis. Chet returned to the oratory for the remainder of the night, but the pervasive presence continued. Finally, morning arrived, about which he writes, "As the sun brightened, the eastern horizon and the last shreds of aurora faded, I was suddenly startled by a pair of swallows that began to dart in and out of the Galeras oratory, hunting insects on the wing. I followed them inside and discovered a nest with 3 chicks perched on a protruding stone just above the place where I had been sitting. The mysterious presence I had felt so strongly in the darkness was not God, nor spirit, nor demon, but the respirations and featherings of swallows." The truly extraordinary, Ed Lynn says, a world in a grain of sand, is not a dramatic event or a mystical presence. It is the mystery and miracle of the ordinary, everyday events, the night stars, and even baby swallows. I think whatever benchmarks we have in our lives, whatever spiritual beliefs that we find truth in and then tenderly cultivate and nurture, have to be something that will keep us company in the dark. Something like baby swallows. Not those particular ones, but some connection to nature, to all that is made, that reminds us of our place in the universe. Something like the love of our families, or if our families weren't particularly loving or accepting, the love of our chosen friends, the ones who will sit with us in both joy and sadness. Something like the love of God, or the spirit of caring people, which reminds us that we too are holy and deserving of love. Our real beliefs are tested in the dark, when we are seemingly alone, or when we are sick, when we are depressed, when we cannot sleep. And it's then that we have to reach out to our benchmarks, the steadfast sources of care in our lives, and ask, "Excuse me, are you still there?" And if we've picked the right ones, we will always hear back, even if it's not out loud, Yes, I'm still here. Before she died, Unitarian Universalist minister Nancy Schaefer wrote a poem called "A Theology Adequate for the Night." A theology adequate for the night, not God as unmoved mover, one who sets the earth in motion and withdrew, not the one to thank when those cherished do not die, for providence includes equally power to harm. Not a God of exactings, as if love could be earned or subtracted. But this may work in the night. Something that breathes with us as others sleep. Something that breathes also those sleeping, so no one is alone. Something that is the beginning of love, and also each part of how love is completed. Something so large, wherever we are not separate, which teaches again the way to start over. Night is the test, when grief lies uncovered and longing shows clear, when nothing we do can hasten earth's turning or delay it. This may be adequate for the night, this holding, something that steadfastly breathes us, which we also are learning to breathe. Friends, I wish for you a theology adequate for the night. Faith in a steadfast love which holds you even in the dark. And if you are not as clear as Julian of Norwich about God's existence and love, I hope that you will accept our love in its stead. Or maybe it's the same thing. May it too be adequate for the night. Amen, and blessed be.